It happened at a family dinner. Nothing dramatic. No warning. Plates still warm. Glasses half full. The kind of moment where you think you're safe because everyone is chewing and talking about nothing important. And that's when my mother said it. Calmly. Casually. Like she was announcing a change in the weather. She said my sister would be moving in with me. Not asked. Not suggested. Decided. She didn't look at me for permission. She didn't pause to see my reaction. She just said it like my life was a piece of furniture she could rearrange whenever she felt like it. Something inside me snapped so quietly I almost didn't hear it. My chest tightened. My jaw locked. And before I could talk myself out of it, before guilt could crawl up my spine like it always did, I said no. Just one word. No explanation. No apology. I refused. The room went dead silent. You know that silence. The kind that isn't peace, it's pressure. The kind where everyone is waiting to see how badly you're about to be punished for stepping out of line. And then she slapped me. Hard enough that my ears rang. Hard enough that my head turned with the force of it. Hard enough that the table rattled and someone dropped a fork. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even touch my face. I just sat there for a second, feeling the heat bloom across my cheek, feeling something old and ugly resurface in my bones. And then I stood up. I picked up my bag, and I walked out without saying another word. That was the moment everything changed. Even though I didn't know it yet. I'm 28 years old. I pay my own rent. I pay my own bills. I don't ask my family for money. I don't ask them for help. I am the one they call when something goes wrong. The one who fixes things. The one who figures it out. The one who can handle it. That phrase followed me my entire life. She can handle it. Say it enough times and it stops sounding like a compliment and starts sounding like permission. Permission to lean. Permission to take. Permission to never ask how heavy the weight is because you've already decided who's going to carry it. I was good at being responsible. Too good. I learned early that being capable made me useful and being useful made me loved. Or at least tolerated. I learned how to swallow resentment before I learned how to ask for help. I learned how to stay quiet, how to smooth things over, how to make myself smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. And somewhere along the way, my family stopped seeing me as a daughter or a sister and started seeing me as a resource. That night at the table wasn't the first time they crossed a line. It was just the first time I said no out loud. When I walked out, I didn't run. I didn't slam the door. I didn't turn around no matter how loud my mother's voice got behind me. I could hear her shouting my name, the edge of panic creeping in, not because she was worried about me, but because control was slipping through her fingers. I kept walking. Each step felt like I was dragging my entire childhood behind me. Every moment I had folded instead of fought. Every time I had chosen peace over self-respect. Have you ever felt that? That moment where you realize you've been bending for so long you don't even remember what standing straight feels like? Have you ever wondered how many times you're expected to forgive before forgiveness turns into permission? How many times you're supposed to say, it's fine, before it becomes a lie you tell so often you start believing it? I didn't go home right away. I walked until my legs burned and my thoughts got loud. My face throbbed where she hit me, but that pain was nothing compared to what was clawing at my chest. Anger, yes. But underneath it, something heavier. Grief. Grief for the version of myself who thought if she just tried harder, loved better, gave more, things would eventually be fair. That slap wasn't just about that night. It was about every time I had been told to be patient. Every time I had been guilted into helping. Every time family was used like a weapon to keep me in line. And as I walked, I realized something that terrified me. If I went back, if I apologized, if I took her in, nothing would ever change. Not for me. Not for them. What would you have done? Honestly. Would you have swallowed it and gone back to the table? Would you have told yourself she didn't mean it, that she was stressed, that family is family? Or would you have done what I did and walked away, knowing full well the cost of that decision? Because make no mistake, I knew there would be a cost. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. That slap was the last time I would accept being treated like a tool instead of a human being. The last time my silence would be mistaken for consent. The last time I would carry someone else's life on my back just to prove I was good enough. And if you think this story ends with me forgiving and forgetting, you're wrong. If you think this was about revenge in the way people like to imagine it, screaming, dramatic confrontations, petty payback, you're wrong about that too. What came next wasn't loud. It wasn't impulsive. It was quiet, calculated. And it changed everything. Stay with me. Because what I did after that dinner didn't just expose my family. It exposed a pattern that had been rotting us from the inside for years. That night, I sat in a small cafe with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I didn't even want. My friend sat across from me, watching me the way you watch someone who's barely holding it together. I didn't have to explain much. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. When I told her what happened, when I said the words out loud, she slapped me for saying no. Something shifted. Not in her. In me. Because she didn't minimize it. She didn't say she didn't mean it. She didn't say that's just how she is. She didn't tell me to be understanding. She looked at me and said, that's not okay. Simple. Clear. No excuses. And for the first time in my life, I felt something loosen inside my chest. Validation. The kind that makes you realize how long you've been gaslighting yourself. We talked for hours. About the pattern. About how every crisis somehow landed in my lap. About how my sister always needed help, always needed saving, always had a reason why this time was different. About how my mother framed my compliance as duty and my resistance as betrayal. Hearing it reflected back to me, stripped of emotion, stripped of family loyalty, was like seeing a bruise you'd been covering up for years. That's when my friend asked me a question that changed the way I saw everything. She asked me what would happen if I stopped fixing things. Not temporarily. Not as a punishment. But permanently. What would actually collapse? And who would be forced to finally face the consequences they'd been avoiding? I didn't have an answer right away. But I knew one thing. I was done reacting. I was done explaining. If they wanted to paint me as selfish, as cruel, as ungrateful, then fine. But I wasn't going to hand them the brush anymore. I was going to let facts speak where my voice had been ignored. So I went home and I opened my laptop. And I started looking. I looked at old messages. Requests for money. Promises to pay me back. Emergencies that somehow happened every month. I looked at bank transfers I barely remembered making. Amounts small enough to justify at the time, large enough to add up over years. I looked at the way the language never changed. Just this once. I'm desperate. You're the only one who understands. Family helps family. And I realized something that made my hands shake. This wasn't chaos. It was a system. A system that worked because I made it work. Because I absorbed the damage. Because I cleaned up the messes. Because I stayed quiet. And the moment I stopped doing that, the system would either adapt or collapse. That's when my anger changed shape. It stopped being explosive and started being precise. I wasn't interested in hurting anyone. I was interested in stopping the bleeding. And sometimes, to do that, you have to cauterize a wound. The next time I saw them, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I brought receipts. Facts. Dates. Numbers. I laid them out calmly, watching their faces change as reality crept in. Watching the narrative they'd rehearsed fall apart under the weight of evidence. And for the first time, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain. They were. That was the moment the balance shifted. And once it shifted, it couldn't be undone. The fallout was louder than the slap. Calls from relatives. Messages filled with accusations and concern that wasn't really concern. Stories twisted and retold until I barely recognized myself in them. And for a moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far. If telling the truth was worse than enduring the lie. If protecting myself meant becoming the villain they always said I was. But then I remembered the sting on my face. The years of quiet sacrifice. The way my strength had been used against me. And I knew I wasn't cruel. I was finished. Revenge didn't look like destruction. It looked like boundaries. It looked like consequences. It looked like me choosing myself after a lifetime of being chosen last. And if that makes me selfish, then maybe selfish is just the word people use when they lose access to you. Once the truth was out, Even in fragments, the ground under my family shifted. Not because I was loud. Not because I demanded anything. But because I stopped absorbing the impact for them. And when you remove the cushion from people who've been falling their entire lives, they don't land gently. They panic. They thrash. They look for someone to blame. That someone was me. Phones started ringing. Messages started coming in from numbers I hadn't heard from in years. Aunts. Cousins. Family friends who suddenly felt qualified to weigh in on my character. They didn't ask what happened. They already knew, or at least they thought they did. My mother had told them. A carefully edited version where she was the wounded parent, my sister was the helpless victim, and I was the cold, ungrateful daughter who turned her back on her own blood. It would have destroyed me once. I would have scrambled to explain, to soften, to defend myself with emotion instead of facts. I would have begged to be understood. But something had burned out of me after that night. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I corrected. Briefly. Calmly. With evidence when necessary. And when it wasn't, I stayed silent. Silence, I learned, is terrifying to people who are used to controlling the story. The more I refused to play my old role, the more desperate they became to force me back into it. My sister showed up at my place unannounced, pounding on the door like she could beat obedience into me through wood and metal. I didn't let her in. I listened. I heard the rage, the fear, the entitlement cracking in her voice as she accused me of ruining her life. Of abandoning her. Of choosing pride over family. What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was thank you. Because thanking me would have meant acknowledging how much I had already given. And acknowledging that would have shattered the illusion that I owed her more. When she finally left, I slid down against the door and sat there, shaking. Not from regret. From release. Because for the first time, I didn't fix it. I didn't offer money. I didn't offer solutions. I let the discomfort exist. And the world didn't end. But my family didn't stop. My mother escalated. She always did when control slipped. She went from rage to tears, from threats to pleas. She sent messages about overdue bills like they were my responsibility. She talked about stress, about health, about how worried she was. She reminded me of everything she'd done for me growing up, as if love were a loan with compound interest. And then she crossed another line. She tried to convince people I was unstable. Suddenly, concern replaced anger. Concern that felt sharp and invasive. People asking if I was okay. If I was under a lot of pressure. If maybe I needed help. As if setting boundaries were a symptom. As if saying no were evidence of something broken in me. I saw it for what it was immediately. If she couldn't control my actions, she would discredit my mind. That was the moment any remaining doubt evaporated. Because abuse doesn't always look like fists or shouting. Sometimes it looks like weaponized concern. Sometimes it looks like people smiling sadly while they question your sanity because you refuse to keep bleeding quietly. I asked myself the hardest question of all. Had I gone too far? Had my refusal caused damage I couldn't undo? Had I crossed from self-protection into cruelty? And then I asked myself another question. Why did no one ever ask that when I was the one giving everything up? Why was my pain acceptable as long as it was quiet? That question steadied me, anchored me, reminded me that guilt is not the same as wrongdoing. Guilt is often just the echo of old conditioning, screaming because it's losing power. I made my boundaries clear after that. Not angrily. Not dramatically. I told them I would not house my sister. I would not lend money. I would not mediate their conflicts or rescue them from consequences they refused to face. If there was help, it would be structured, limited, and conditional. And if those conditions weren't met, the answer would remain no. They called it punishment. I called it adulthood. Weeks passed. Then months. The chaos didn't disappear overnight. It never does. But it changed shape. My sister had to find work she didn't like. My mother had to manage without leaning on me. There were no dramatic apologies. No tearful reunions. Just an uncomfortable recalibration where everyone had to learn new rules. And in the quiet that followed, something unexpected happened. I started to breathe. My evenings stopped being emergencies. My phone stopped buzzing with panic. I slept through the night for the first time in years. I didn't realize how much of my energy had been siphoned off until it was finally mine again. I went to work. I cooked real meals. I sat in silence without waiting for it to be broken by someone else's crisis. That silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Eventually, my sister reached out. Not to ask for money. Not to demand anything. Just to talk. Carefully. Like someone approaching a wild animal they weren't sure would bolt or bite. She told me about therapy. About how hard it was to hear herself described honestly. About how she'd spent years blaming everyone else for choices she didn't want to own. She didn't absolve me. She didn't call me a hero. She admitted she still felt angry sometimes. That part mattered to me. Because real change isn't neat. It's messy. It hurts. It drags old wounds into the light and forces you to look at them without flinching. My mother was slower. Still is. Control doesn't die easily. But even she changed in small ways. Fewer demands. Fewer threats. Long pauses before she spoke, like she was measuring her words for the first time instead of assuming I would just take whatever was thrown at me. And I realized something then that I hadn't understood before. Boundaries don't fix people. They reveal them. They show who is willing to adapt and who only wants access. They don't guarantee healing. They just make it possible. Looking back now, I don't see what I did as revenge in the way people like to frame it. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped sacrificing myself to keep them comfortable. I didn't retaliate. I withdrew. I stepped out of a role that was killing me slowly and let the system feel the absence. Revenge would have been screaming. Revenge would have been humiliation. Revenge would have been tearing them down just to feel powerful. What I did was quieter. Harder. I chose myself. I chose honesty over harmony. I chose boundaries over approval. And yes, it cost me things. Relationships changed. Some bridges burned. Some will probably never be rebuilt the same way. But I didn't lose myself. And that matters more than being liked by people who only loved me when I was useful. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If the people who raised you, who claim to love you, only treat you well when you give, when you bend, when you disappear, what does loyalty really mean? Is it staying and enduring until there's nothing left of you? Or is it finally saying no and letting the fallout happen? If you were me, would you have gone back to that table, swallowed the slap, handed over your keys, and called it love? Or would you have done what I did and changed the rules, even if it meant being called selfish, cruel, ungrateful? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting back. It's refusing to play along ever again.